All right, let's take a deep dive into something pretty thought-provoking today. Spiritual hypocrisy.
Mm.
We're going to explore the idea that, appearances can be really deceiving, especially when it comes to spirituality. Our guide for all this, our exploration, is going to be the Bhaja Govindam. It's a classic Sanskrit text by this Indian philosopher, Adi Shankaracharya.
Shankaracharya, well, he was a huge proponent of something called Advaita Vedanta. It's a school of thought that really stresses the oneness of everything, and also how important it is to realize your true self. The Bhaja Govindam is fascinating. It directly challenges all of us to look past the superficial stuff when it comes to spirituality.
Yeah, it's almost like the text is like, hey, just because someone looks the part, they've got the robes, they do all the rituals, doesn't actually mean that they've done any inner work. Like, haven't we all, I know I have, run into someone who seemed really spiritual, but something just felt off. It was almost like they were playing a part.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what Shankaracharya was getting at. He really believed all those outward symbols could easily be used for, personal gain, to get followers or influence, maybe even just material comfort. And without any real, spiritual depth behind it, he was really critiquing, like, the hypocrisy he saw in the religious practices of his time.
But don't those outward rituals have some value? Like, don't they help people cultivate discipline and focus? Which then could lead to, some kind of inner transformation?
That's a great question, and it's actually a debate that goes on even today. But Shankaracharya argued that true renunciation, or what's called sannyasa, it's all internal. It's a state of mind, not this, outward performance. It's about detaching from, like, our ego's desires, not just our possessions. He uses this really vivid picture, people with matted hair and shaved heads, simple robes, all those classic markers of a, spiritual seeker. But then he warns you that all of that could just be a disguise.
So it's like they're wearing the uniform without actually enlisting. So how do we move past all those superficial displays and figure out, who is genuinely on a spiritual path?
Well, the Bhaja Govindam is big on the idea that the truth is always there. But it's our own ignorance, what's called avidya in Sanskrit, that keeps us from seeing it clearly.
Avidya, so it's not just like a lack of information, it's something deeper.
Yeah, exactly. It's way deeper than that. Avidya is more like a veil, like an illusion created by our ego. And how attached we are to, all the material stuff. Think of it like this. You're so into a movie that you completely miss this gorgeous sunset happening right outside the window. You're so focused on the screen that you don't even experience the beauty that's right there.
That is such a good analogy. So it's not that we're stupid or we don't know anything. It's that our perception is clouded by all our own desires and distractions.
Exactly. And it's really interesting. Modern psychology is starting to explore these same ideas, like cognitive biases. It shows how all our preconceived notions and our emotional baggage, they really distort our perception of what's real.
So this Advaita thing, it's been recognized across cultures and time periods, even in fields like psychology. It's almost like humans just have this tendency to create illusions that stop us from seeing the truth. No wonder Shankaracharya spent so much time trying to help people break free from all of that. But how do we actually do it? What's the antidote to this avidya problem?
Well, the Bhaja Govindam actually offers a solution in the form of 3 pillars of inner renunciation: self-inquiry, discrimination, and detachment. And they're not just abstract concepts, they're really tools for living a more authentic life. And each one of them is so crucial for getting rid of those illusions, those layers of illusions, and seeing the world more clearly.
Okay, I'm intrigued now. Let's dive into these pillars. First up, self-inquiry. What exactly is that, and how does that help us break free from all that avidya?
Self-inquiry, it's all about asking that fundamental question, who am I? But not in some superficial way. It's about looking beyond, your job title, your things, your roles in life, even your thoughts and emotions. It's about discovering who you really are, your true nature, beyond all the masks we wear,
That sounds pretty deep. Are we talking, meditation retreats?
Yeah.
Silent contemplation? How does someone even, begin this kind of self-inquiry?
You don't necessarily need to run off to a mountaintop or anything. You can start by just observing your own thoughts and your actions, but without any judgment. Notice how often your sense of self is tied to those external things, like achievements or possessions, even opinions.
Yeah, it's like when we define ourselves by our job titles or how many likes we get on social media. We look outside for validation instead of looking within. But how do we shift that focus? How do we actually practice self-inquiry in a way that gets rid of those illusions?
One really powerful technique is to just sit quietly and ask yourself, who am I? over and over. But don't try to come up with some answer. Just let the question really sink in. See what thoughts and feelings come up. You might be surprised what you find.
So it's not about getting the right answer. It's more about like the process of questioning itself.
Exactly.
It's about creating that space for self-awareness.
Yeah, exactly. And as you keep practicing self-inquiry, you'll start to notice a shift in like your perception. You'll see the world differently. And yourself, you'll have more clarity and less attachment to those external things, those markers of identity.
Wow. That's really powerful. So self-inquiry, that's like the first step in clearing out the fog of avidya and starting to see the truth about who we are. But the Bhaja Govindam doesn't stop there, right? What's the next pillar on this like journey of inner renunciation?
Well, after you've started that self-inquiry process, the Bhaja Govindam says we got to develop another really important skill, discrimination. And this is where it gets really interesting.
All right. So we've kind of started to chip away at all those illusions with self-inquiry. But now, I guess, we need to sharpen our minds even more with this next pillar.
Right.
Discrimination. What does that even mean in this context?
Yeah.
Is it about, like, judging other people?
No, not at all. Discrimination, the way the Bhaja Govindam uses it, is all about developing a discerning mind.
Okay.
A mind that can really tell the difference between what's real and what's not real. What lasts and what doesn't. Think of it like, refining your taste buds. So you can really enjoy all those subtle flavors in a good wine.
Okay. So instead of judging people, we're refining our judgment about, I guess, the world itself.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how does that connect back to this, like, spiritual hypocrisy thing?
Well, remember, the Bhaja Govindam warns us about mistaking outward appearances for, genuine spirituality. Discrimination helps us see through those appearances and understand the true nature of things. Like, let's say you're on social media, you see someone posting about this amazing meditation retreat they went on. They look all blissful and enlightened. It's so easy to get caught up in that and feel jealous or even question your own spiritual progress.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. It's like everyone else has it all figured out and I'm over here struggling to stay afloat.
Right. But this is where discrimination comes in. Instead of getting carried away by that image, you stop for a second and you ask yourself, what's really real here? Is this person's experience really genuine, or are they just putting on a show for social media? You start to see that there's a difference between like a fleeting feeling of bliss and a really deep, lasting change.
So discrimination helps us avoid comparing ourselves to everyone else.
Right.
And getting caught up in this illusion of like spiritual perfection.
Yeah.
But how realistic is that in our world today? I mean, come on. We're bombarded with images and stories that just feed all of our insecurities.
It's true. It's definitely not easy. But the Bhaja Govindam, it doesn't try to get you to escape the world. It just offers like a better way to be in the world, a way to navigate it. Discrimination, it's not about being cynical or judgmental. It's about developing that discerning eye that can see through the superficial stuff and really appreciate what's genuine.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this works, but let's get a little more practical here. Like, think about the last decision you made. How could you have used this whole discrimination idea to make a better choice? Maybe you were tempted to buy some new gadget or got caught up in some argument online.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
How could discrimination have helped you there?
Yeah, those are great examples. Let's say you were about to buy that new gadget. Discrimination would make you ask yourself, do I really need this thing? Will it make me happy, like really happy? Or am I just chasing a temporary feeling? Or in that online argument, discrimination would help you stop and ask yourself, is this even important? Am I adding anything meaningful here? Or am I just, feeding my ego's need to be right all the time?
Those are good questions to ask, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like discrimination helps us shift our focus from that, like, immediate gratification to the long-term consequences for us and for other people. It's about making choices about what really matters, not just what looks shiny in the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
But, sometimes even when I know something isn't good for me, I still get attached to it.
Right.
How do you deal with that? That's where this detachment thing comes in.
Absolutely. Right? Detachment is the third pillar in the Bhaja Govindam's recipe for inner renunciation. And it's probably the hardest one to wrap your head around. Yeah. Because it's often misunderstood. People think it means you have to, like, shut off your emotions or just withdraw from the world.
Yeah. I've heard people say things like, just detach from your emotions.
Yeah.
Or detach from the outcome. But that's always seemed a bit, like, cold and not very realistic to me.
I get it. But detachment, the way Shankaracharya taught it, It's not about suppressing your feelings or not caring. It's about changing your perspective about what you're attached to. It's about realizing that true happiness doesn't come from clinging to things that are always changing.
Okay, so it's not about being a robot. It's more about being more aware of like what we're clinging to
Right.
and why.
Exactly.
But how do we actually do detachment in everyday life? It all seems pretty abstract.
Well, imagine you're stuck in traffic, right?
Right.
Instead of getting all frustrated and angry, which only makes you feel worse, you practice detachment. You recognize that this is temporary.
Right.
You can't control the traffic, but you can control how you react to it.
Right.
You could use that time to listen to music or do a breathing exercise, or even just observe your own thoughts and feelings without judging them.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about loosening our grip on like all the things we can't control and finding some peace in this moment.
Right.
It's almost like accepting what is, even if it's not what we want. But isn't that super hard to do when we're so attached to all our desires and expectations and all around?
It definitely is. It's something you practice, not something you achieve.
Right.
But the more you practice, the more you realize that true freedom is letting go of those attachments. It doesn't mean you don't feel anything or want things. It just means you don't let them control you.
It's almost like detachment helps us create a little space between ourselves and our experiences. So we can observe them without getting swept away.
Exactly.
It's like that space between you and the movie screen.
Yeah.
So you can enjoy the movie but not lose yourself in it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But how does all this connect back to spiritual hypocrisy? How does detachment help us avoid those traps?
Well, remember how the Bhaja Govindam warns about those people who use spirituality for, their own personal gain, to fill their stomachs, as it says. Detachment helps us break free from that ego-driven pursuit of spiritual rewards, like collecting trophies.
So it's about wanting real change, not just the perks of being seen as spiritual or enlightened or whatever.
Exactly. Detachment lets us approach our spiritual practice with more humility and authenticity, without needing all that recognition or validation. It's about doing the work because it's important, not for some external reward.
That's a pretty powerful shift in how to think about things. And it really makes sense with what we've been talking about. Self-inquiry helps us see through our ego's illusions. Discrimination helps us tell the difference between what's real and what's not. And then detachment helps us let go of those things that really don't matter. It's like these three pillars work together to guide us toward a more fulfilling life, more real life.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what about all the different ways people are expressing spirituality these days? What about things like yoga and meditation and mindfulness? Do they fit into all of this?
Yeah.
Or are they just another form of like spiritual materialism? I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
That is a great question. And that's something we can talk about more in the last part of our deep dive. Stay tuned as we explore how these ancient teachings can apply to the modern spiritual world.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
I feel like we've uncovered some really profound stuff from the Bhaja Govindam. Who knew a text from like centuries ago could be so relevant to our lives now?
It is remarkable how these teachings, they just seem to go beyond time and culture.
Yeah.
They really speak to like something fundamental about being human, this need for truth and meaning that goes deeper than the surface.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And speaking of the surface, I really want to get into that question we left off with. Like, how do these old teachings apply to how people are spiritual today? We've got yoga studios everywhere you look, meditation apps, mindfulness for everything. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it really is. And it's easy to get caught up in all the trends and fads without even understanding what these practices are really about.
Right. Like, is everyone actually on some spiritual path? Or are they just checking off boxes on their, wellness checklist?
That's exactly where the Bhaja Govindam comes in. It gives us this really valuable way to decide what's what. Remember, it's all about inner change, not outward appearances. So the question to ask with any spiritual practice is this helping me become more self-aware, more discriminating, more detached?
So it's not about the practice itself.
Right.
It's about what you're trying to get out of it and the inner work you're doing. Like, is it moving us toward that inner renunciation that Shankaracharya talks about?
Exactly. Take yoga, for example. It can be amazing for your body and mind. But if you're only doing it to get a certain body type or to show off how flexible you are, then you're kind of missing the point.
It's like those people you hear about who are so focused on doing the perfect handstand that they forget about the inner peace and self-awareness that yoga is supposed to be about.
Exactly. The Bhaja would say, ask yourself, am I doing this to feed my ego or to go beyond it?
So how do we find that balance?
Yeah.
How do we do these practices in a way that's real and actually helps us grow spiritually?
It's an ongoing process of self-inquiry and discrimination. Every time you get on your yoga mat or sit down to meditate, check in with yourself. Ask yourself, why am I doing this? What am I hoping to get out of it?
It's like we need to be just as mindful and intentional about our spiritual practices as we are with other parts of our life.
Exactly. And it's not about being perfect or judging yourself harshly. It's about developing that discerning mind that can see when you're getting caught up in the trap of spiritual materialism.
So it's about constantly checking in with
Yeah,
ourselves,
sure.
making sure what we're doing lines up with what we truly value and want to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. And the Bhaja Govindam reminds us that, the path to liberation, it's not about racking up spiritual points or getting to some enlightened status. It's about purifying the mind, letting go of attachments, and realizing who you really are.
It's about the journey itself, not the destination.
Right.
And recognizing that real transformation happens from the inside out, not the other way around.
That's a great way to put it.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on what it means to be on a spiritual path.
Yeah, me too. It's always so fascinating to look into these ancient wisdom teachings and see how they still apply to us today.
And speaking of illumination, I think the Bhaja Govindam has really shed some light on this whole idea of spiritual hypocrisy
Absolutely.
and how to avoid those traps ourselves.
Definitely. And I think it's important to remember that, we're all in this together. We all have our blind spots. We all mess up. We all get caught up in how things look sometimes.
So it's about being kind to ourselves and each other, while still trying to live a more genuine life.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Well, dear listener, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to, question how things look, to develop your own discernment and embrace this whole journey of inner transformation. Remember, the truth is always there, waiting to be discovered. So keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Until next time.